ant keepers, and happy Halloween to you all. It's great to have another weekly video that's on this occasion because Halloween only happens once a year. Today we're going to be talking about how to care for large colonies that may be in your collection. When it comes to newer ant keepers, they're not really experienced when it comes to colonies that have 1, 2, 3, or even 500 plus workers. But we're going to talk about the care and maintenance that they need week to week, and we're going to move in to see some of our massive family colonies behind me, mainly starting out with the Avengers. In the ANTICS antiverse, as we go as far left as possible, we run into the first official colony to hit the ANTICS ant room, which is the Avengers. The biggest large-sized ants we have in the ant room currently, with numbers over 100. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see just how active they really are. Even without food being offered to them, the Avengers really do find a way to occupy their time at all times of the day. They dig tunnels, move sand around, and really make their little enclosure home as they see fit. Like we've said many times before in the past, you can never quite tell what an ant colony will do on a day-to-day basis. You can set it up exactly as you see fit, and they will completely turn it upside down and make it into their own creation. For example, they have taken one of the round-robin tubes from the vortex nest and completely blocked it off to the outside world. They do have one single tunnel that runs the length of this sandy setup, but I don't really see too many ants going this way, and it makes me wonder what exactly it's for. When it comes to ant keeping, this is something you should expect as the colony grows larger. You never quite know what they're capable of or what they may do, and everything seems to be a surprise. The same as with their water test tube setup. They have also taken sand from the OutWorld and made a series of tunnels that go throughout the water setup, into the connections, and into the nest. As we peek into their world, you will see that the same is found on the inside of their nest. Not only have they blocked out the right port from the outside, but they have done the exact same from the inside as well. Every week they use this as a garbage disposal. Though it may look messy, I see them every single week dragging up bit by bit and putting it in the OutWorld for me to remove. Ants are very clean creatures, and they do not like death and decay close to their nest. This is their way of having their garbage on standby, buried, so it doesn't necessarily smell up the nest until they're ready to move it out. As we creep in closer to the middle of the nest, you will see that they have completely covered every inch of this nest to their liking. The outer rims have been covered in sand as well, maybe to preserve heat better. A lot of their cocoons and mature brood is exactly where you'd expect it to be by the heat. And it seems like the middle is known as the protective barrier that's strongest of the nest. So what do you make of a colony this large? And what would you expect to happen when your colony gets this big as well? Well, the answer can be pretty simply put. You never know, and that's what makes ant keeping such a thrill and makes it so interesting for all of us, the ANTICS family. But how do you care for these kind of large colonies that we will eventually have in our midst? Well, that is a truly simple but complicated question on its own. Let's get into exactly how I care for these little ladies week to week. The majority of direct contact you will have with your larger colonies will consist around their outworld, or in this case, a sandbox or recreation of a small beach enclosure. This is where they know their food, which would be protein and sugar sources, will mainly be delivered on a week-to-week basis. But this is not the only time you will have direct contact with them. You will also need to make sure you clean it week to week as well. Like we said earlier, ants are very clean creatures, and they know what a dirty area feels and smells like. So it's a very good idea to go into your outworld every so often, or once a week in this case, and clean it out to the best of your ability, and make it look like it was new. With our offering ramp cleaned out, I'm quickly going to go around the outworld and just move around the substrate a little bit. This helps it from getting stagnant, which I notice does happen if you leave it alone for a couple weeks straight. Now that they have a more or less clean outworld, I'm going to add a little bit of honey and a protein snack for them. We'll add a little bit of honey to their ramp. And give me one moment, I'm going to chop up a road for them. I could put it in completely whole as it is, but I like to cut it in half. This really just helps them to have more ants to quickly pick up the protein, instead of them all clustering over two parts of where the cuts are. Now that they have their roach and their honey, I also want to give them a Halloween treat. A piece of cinnamon bun that I believe they're going to love and enjoy. Now that the offerings are in the outworld, let's move on and come back to this at the end of the video. I'm sure there's going to be a lot to see. As we pop into the next sections of successfully caring for your mature colony, it's time to talk about water and the different roles that it plays to make sure your ant colony stays content and hydrated. Not only do the ants need to have a constant supply of water, which would be the test tube setup here, but they also need a hydration station that goes into the nest and makes sure that moisture mixes around in the air where all their brood is. Brood definitely need to stay damp at all times. This is especially important for larger colonies you may have at home and the Avengers. If the moisture was to suddenly disappear from the nest, all of the brood's growth would immediately stunt, and in the worst case scenario, they would shrivel up and die. Having moisture in the nest is what keeps the brood damp and moving and healthy until they're able to cocoon and eventually become workers. Now, one last thing would be, if the moisture ever did leave the nest, the worker ants could literally lick the brood damp again. But it's a huge mission for them to keep all the brood alive, especially when you have close to 50 plus pupa and larvae in a colony like we have behind us. Another important matter covering the water is that if you do have a test tube water setup for them, there are times that the cotton literally becomes dry closest to where they drink the water. They then have to start tearing into the cotton and pulling it apart, desperately trying to get back to the water where it is settled in. This is sometimes impossible for them to do, so I highly recommend taking their test tube out of their setup from time to time, going in and just giving it a tiny poke. You may have a worker to escape, but this is important because without a steady supply of water, there would be a lot of issues in the nest, and if that means a worker or two gets out, then that's okay. One of the last big things I would highly recommend you don't do with your mature colonies is trying to move around what they have set up. You see, when you look at your ant colonies long enough, you start to notice things that you don't exactly like that they have done themselves. For example, how they've moved all of this sand into their tubing. But no matter what you do, please do not move anything that they have put on their own time and space. you will totally end up making it a lot worse than it actually was to begin with, and it becomes a huge issue and mess. As we make our way back to the OutWorld, we see a lot of action beginning to spiral around the treats that we put in earlier. In the end of the day, ants really do have a lot of resemblance to humans. They work hard, get hungry, and like to have fun from time to time. In the world of ants, you can never be too sure what they're going to do next, but you can do the best you can to care for them and let them have a long life that's successful and proud. I believe that the Avengers are going to get even bigger in the months to come, and we have a lot to look forward to. When it comes to large mature colonies, these are the best of the best, and it's great that we all have the front seat view to watch them do what they do best. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the video. I hope you learned a thing or two and enjoyed watching the Avengers. Every time I peek in on them, I am truly amazed at exactly what they have accomplished and how they treat their nest with the substrate, how hard they work on their tunnels, and they're just happy ants. So, I'm happy, they're happy, and all together I wish you all happy ant keeping.